The road should have ended long before they reached the forest, but it stretched on like something refusing to let them turn back. Trees leaned inward from both sides, swallowing the sky and dimming the last threads of daylight. Even before anything happened, the silence felt wrong, like something waiting. Adil laughed to break the tension, gripping the steering wheel tighter than he realized. He joked about broken maps and forgotten roads, but his voice carried a crack that didn't belong there. Saina watched the trees instead, certain something moved just beyond the glass. Farhan tried to lighten the mood, tapping his phone against his palm. There was no signal, no music, no distraction left to fill the growing quiet. The deeper they went, the more it felt like they had crossed into somewhere uninvited. It had started as a simple detour, a quick thrill before heading home. Someone mentioned an abandoned cabin sealed for decades, and curiosity took over. None of them admitted it, but the idea had settled too deeply to ignore. At the last roadside stop, an old man overheard them speaking. He approached slowly, his eyes pale and distant, like they no longer belonged to him. When he spoke, his warning came out in a trembling whisper. He told them not to look for the cabin, not even to speak of it. His hand shook as he pointed toward the forest road they now followed. The fear in his voice lingered long after they drove away. They laughed at him at first, brushing it off as superstition, but no one forgot the way he stared, unblinking and hollow. It was the kind of look that followed you long after it should have faded. The forest grew unnaturally quiet as they drove deeper. No insects buzzed, no birds called, no wind stirred the leaves. It felt like the entire world had paused just for them. Farhan switched on the radio, but only static answered him. The sound pulsed unevenly, almost like broken whispers trying to form words. He turned it off quickly, pretending it meant nothing. Adil slowed the car when the road narrowed into a rough trail. The branches overhead twisted together, forming a tunnel of shadows. No one spoke as they stepped out into the suffocating silence. Sana turned to look back, but the road behind them felt unfamiliar. It looked narrower, darker, like it had shifted while they weren't paying attention. A cold unease crept into her chest. Then they heard it for the first time. A hollow knock echoed faintly through the forest, uneven and distant. It didn't sound natural, and it didn't feel accidental. They followed the sound without admitting they were doing so. Each step felt heavier, drawn forward by something unseen. The forest seemed to tighten around them. The cabin appeared suddenly, as if it had been waiting to be noticed. One moment there was nothing, and the next it stood between the trees. Sana felt her breath catch in her throat. It looked older than it should have been, its wood dark and cracked like something long dead. The windows were sealed from the inside with rotting planks. No light escaped from within. Farhan stepped closer, trying to appear brave. He reached out, then hesitated before touching the wall. The air around the cabin felt colder than anywhere else. Adil circled toward the front, motioning for them to follow. The ground beneath his feet felt disturbed, uneven in strange ways. It was as if something had been buried and forgotten. They stopped when they saw the door. Thick wooden planks were nailed across it in a chaotic pattern. Rusted nails pierced deep, as though someone had been desperate. Sana leaned closer, studying the nails carefully. They were driven in with uneven force, some bent and twisted. It looked less like sealing a place and more like trapping something. A faint smell leaked through the cracks. It was damp, rotten, and far too strong for something closed so long. The scent clung to her throat. Farhan laughed nervously, blaming mold and decay. His voice broke at the end, betraying him. No one responded. Adil crouched and brushed dirt from the lower door. Beneath it, faint symbols were carved into the wood. They were jagged and unfamiliar. The forest shifted behind them without warning. Leaves rustled despite the still air. Sana turned, but nothing stood there. Another knock echoed, louder this time. It came from inside the cabin, deep and hollow. The sound vibrated through the wood. Farhan stepped back immediately, whispering they should leave. His fear was no longer hidden, but Adil didn't move. Slowly, almost unwillingly, Adil reached for the first plank. His fingers trembled as they touched the wood. Something inside seemed to pull him forward. The plank snapped free with a sharp crack. The sound echoed far too loudly in the silence. Adil stumbled back slightly. Nothing happened at first, and that made it worse. The silence pressed down harder than before. It felt like something was listening. Farhan stepped forward to help, his hands shaking. Together, they pulled at the planks one by one. Each one resisted in its own way. The nails screeched as they were torn loose. The sound felt alive, like something protesting. Sana flinched at every snap. She kept glancing toward the forest, certain they were no longer alone. Something felt closer now, something unseen. When the last plank came loose, the door stood exposed. Deep scratches covered its surface. They all led from the inside. Adil hesitated before touching the handle. For the first time, doubt filled his face. He looked back at the others. No one answered him. The silence demanded a choice. Slowly, he turned the handle. The door opened just slightly, and cold air burst out. The stench that followed made them gag. It was far worse than decay. It felt older than rot, something sealed too long. The air seemed thick, almost alive. Farhan covered his mouth. The door creaked open further on its own. The hinges groaned like something waking. No one touched it. Inside, the cabin was dim and still. Dust floated unmoving in the air. Time felt frozen. Sana stepped closer despite her fear. Something inside felt aware. It wasn't empty. Another knock echoed from deeper within. It sounded deliberate now, almost welcoming. They stepped inside slowly. The air swallowed them whole. The silence deepened. The room was filled with covered furniture. Everything was grey with dust. It looked untouched. Sana touched the wall and pulled back quickly. It felt damp and warm, not like wood at all. Farhan tried to joke again, but his voice echoed strangely. The sound lingered too long. The silence that followed felt heavier. Adil turned a chair facing the wall. Deep claw marks covered its arms. They were frantic and overlapping. Sana thought she saw something move. She turned quickly. Nothing was there. A faint dragging sound came from the hallway. It was slow and uneven. Something was moving. Farhan grabbed Odil's arm, urging him to leave. His fear was obvious now, but Odil didn't respond. Sana noticed marks on the floor. Long trails disturbed the dust. Something had been moving there. The dragging stopped suddenly. Shallow breathing replaced it. It echoed softly. They all froze. The realization settled in. They were not alone. The breathing faded slightly. A scratching sound followed. It came from deeper inside. Adil moved toward the hallway. His expression had changed. Something pulled him forward. The hallway felt tighter, colder. The air pressed against them. Darkness waited ahead. At the end, a small room stood open. Shadows pooled inside. It looked wrong. Farhan hesitated, whispering they should turn back. His voice trembled, but no one listened. Inside, papers were scattered across the floor. The wood was deeply scratched. Something had struggled there. Sana picked up a page. The writing was frantic. The ink had faded. It spoke of a presence inside the cabin, not from outside, but always there. It had been waiting. Another page described failed escapes. The forest twisted paths endlessly. There was no way out. The words grew more desperate. The warnings repeated again and again. Fear filled every line. They had sealed the cabin to contain it, not to keep others out, but to trap something inside. The final message was barely readable. It warned never to open the door. No matter what called, Farhan dropped the pages. Footsteps echoed behind them, slow and dragging. Sana turned toward the doorway. A figure stood there, tall and unnatural. It didn't move, but it watched them. Its shape bent strangely, like something wrong. Then it stepped forward slightly, enough to be seen, enough to understand. It had never been alone, and now it wasn't trapped. The thing did not rush them. It remained still. That made it worse. Farhan screamed for them to run. Panic broke whatever held them. They turned instantly. They ran into the main room. Their footsteps echoed loudly now. The silence shattered. The door was still open ahead. Hope surged briefly. They rushed toward it. Sana crossed outside first. Fresh air hit her lungs. But something felt wrong. The forest had changed. The path was gone. Everything looked unfamiliar. Farhan ran blindly into the trees. Panic drove him forward. He didn't stop. Adil shouted after him. His voice was swallowed instantly. The forest gave nothing back. Farhan's scream echoed in the distance. Then it stopped. Completely. Sana froze in place. Fear locked her body. Adil pulled her forward again. They ran for what felt like hours. The forest twisted around them. Every path looped back. Eventually, they reached a clearing. Exhaustion took over. Sana looked up slowly. The cabin stood there again, unchanged and waiting. It had followed them. Adil shook his head in disbelief. He stepped back slowly. The ground beneath him shifted. Something moved under the soil, subtle but real. He froze. The cabin door creaked behind them. Neither had touched it. It began to close. Sana turned just in time. Darkness filled the doorway. The light vanished. A hollow knock echoed again, but now it came from outside. Something had changed. Sana realized the sound was behind her now. The knocking had followed them. It was no longer trapped. Adil turned slowly, his face drained of color. His eyes searched the trees desperately. The forest answered him with silence. Another knock echoed, sharper and closer. It came from behind a nearby tree. The bark trembled faintly, as if something pressed from within. Sana stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. The tree cracked slightly, revealing a hollow darkness inside. It looked deeper than it should have been. Adil whispered that they needed to move, but his voice had lost its strength. Even he no longer believed they could escape. The fear between them felt heavier than the air. They stepped away carefully, but the knocking followed. It shifted from tree to tree, always near. It felt like the entire forest had become part of it. Sana began to see shapes between the trees. Faint figures stood in the distance, unmoving. No matter where she looked, they remained. Adil tried to run again, but his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the ground, gasping. The soil beneath him pulsed unnaturally. Sana rushed toward him, but something stopped her. A shadow stretched from the nearest tree. It moved slowly, reaching for him. Adil screamed as the shadow touched him. His voice twisted into something inhuman. Then it stopped completely. When the shadow pulled back, he was gone. No trace remained. Only disturbed earth marked the spot. Sana stood alone, unable to breathe properly. The forest closed in around her. The silence returned heavier than ever. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open again. She didn't turn immediately. The knocking had stopped. When she finally looked back, the doorway waited in darkness. It felt different now, almost inviting. Her fear began to fade into something else. A strange calm replaced it. Resistance slipped away. She stepped toward the cabin slowly. Her body moved without hesitation. The forest did not stop her. The doorway grew closer with every step. The darkness felt warm now, familiar in a way she couldn't explain. She crossed the threshold without thinking. The cabin welcomed her silently. The air wrapped around her. Behind her, the door began to close again. The outside world faded. The forest disappeared. The final knock echoed once more. It sounded deeper now, complete, far beyond the trees, on a road that should not exist. Another car slowed to a stop. Laughter filled the air briefly as new voices stepped out. Then, from deep within the forest, something knocked.